The phone rang in the middle of the night, not on a public line, not through diplomatic channels that bureaucrats monitor and log and file away in government archives. This was a direct call, private, secure, between two of the most consequential leaders in the Islamic world right now. And what was discussed in that conversation, what was agreed, what was demanded, what was warned, is already sending shockwaves through the corridors of power from Riyadh to Islamabad, from Washington to Beijing, from Abu Dhabi to Tehran. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the man who has reshaped the kingdom's economy, its society, its foreign policy, and its place in the global order with a speed and a ruthlessness that has stunned even his harshest critics. He picked up that phone for a reason. And the Prime Minister of Pakistan, leading a nation of a 240 million people that sits at one of the most strategically sensitive crossroads on Earth, he answered that call for a reason. The reason is a 48-hour deadline. A window of time so compressed, so urgent, so loaded with consequence, that what happens inside it could genuinely alter the trajectory of the Gulf, of South Asia, of the broader Muslim world, and of the global balance of power in ways that very few people are yet fully prepared for. Stay with this. Because this story is not what the headlines are making it look like. And the full picture, when you see it completely, is far more significant, far more dangerous, and far more historically loaded than anything currently being reported in the mainstream coverage of this extraordinary moment. To understand why this call happened, why it happened now, and why the 48-hour deadline attached to it carries the weight that it does, you have to understand the specific convergence of pressures that has been building across the Gulf and South Asia for months. A convergence that has now reached a point of intensity that demanded exactly this kind of direct, urgent, leader-to-leader communication. Let's start with Saudi Arabia, because MBS is not a man who makes phone calls like this without a very specific calculation behind every word. Mohammed bin Salman has spent the past several years executing one of the most ambitious national transformation projects in modern history, Vision 2030, the blueprint for remaking Saudi Arabia from a petroleum-dependent economy into a diversified, modernized, globally competitive state. Is not simply an economic program. It is a political project, a social revolution, and a geopolitical repositioning all wrapped together. And it requires, above everything else, stability, regional stability, the kind of environment in which foreign investment flows freely, in which massive infrastructure projects can be built and maintained, in which the kingdom's new image as a destination for tourism, entertainment, technology, and finance can be credibly sustained. That stability is now under serious threat from multiple directions simultaneously. And one of those directions involves Pakistan directly, urgently, and in ways that MBS can no longer afford to manage through normal diplomatic channels. Pakistan's strategic position has become acutely unstable in recent months. The economic pressures that have been building for years, the debt crisis, the inflation crisis, the energy crisis, the currency crisis, have not been resolved. They have been temporarily managed, patched over with IMF arrangements and bilateral loans from Gulf partners, including Saudi Arabia, which has repeatedly extended financial lifelines to Islamabad at critical moments, but the underlying structural vulnerabilities remain, and those vulnerabilities create political instability. And political instability in Pakistan, a nuclear-armed state with a history of military intervention and civilian governance, with an intelligence establishment that has complex and not always transparent relationships with non-state actors across the region, creates exactly the kind of unpredictable environment that MBS cannot incorporate into his Vision 2030 calculations. But that is only one layer of why this call happened. There are others, and they go deeper. The Gulf right now is experiencing a realignment of relationships and interests that is moving faster than most outside of durability is being tested in real time. The conflicts in Gaza and across the broader region have generated pressures on every Arab and Muslim government to demonstrate a coherent and credible position on questions of Palestinian rights and regional solidarity in ways that complicate every bilateral relationship and every strategic calculation. Into this already extraordinarily complex environment, a specific set of developments has now introduced a 48-hour urgency that has forced MBS to pick up the phone. What are those developments? Let's be precise, because precision matters here and the temptation to be vague or speculative should be resisted in favor of what the available evidence actually indicates. The first development concerns Pakistan's position in an emerging regional security architecture that Saudi Arabia is attempting to shape. Riyadh has been working, with varying degrees of success and at varying levels of visibility, to build a framework of regional security cooperation that serves Saudi interests. Interests that include containing Iranian influence, maintaining stability in the Gulf itself, managing the complex dynamics of Yemen, and positioning the kingdom as the indispensable hub of a new regional order that doesn't depend on American military presence to the degree it historically has. Pakistan is critical to this architecture, not because of its economic size. Pakistan's economy, despite its enormous population, does not compare to the Gulf states in terms of financial weight. Pakistan is critical because of something else entirely. Its military, its nuclear capability, its institutional depth and security matters that go back decades, and its demographic and ideological weight within the broader Muslim world. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have a relationship that is old, layered, and genuinely deep in ways that go beyond the transactional. Hundreds of thousands of Pakistani workers contribute to the Saudi economy. Pakistani military officers have trained Saudi forces and provided security expertise to the kingdom for generations. Saudi investment and financial support has been a recurring lifeline for the Pakistani state at moments of acute crisis. This is not a relationship between equals in economic terms, but it is a relationship of genuine mutual dependency in strategic terms. And MBS needed to activate that relationship at exactly this moment because of what is developing on the regional chessboard. The second development, and this is where the urgency of the 48-hour deadline becomes most visible, concerns a specific diplomatic and security situation that has reached a point requiring immediate resolution. Multiple regional sources with knowledge of the conversations happening at this level of the Gulf power structure have indicated that a decision point has been reached on a matter that involves both the Saudis and the Pakistanis directly, that has implications for the broader regional security environment, and that cannot be deferred without significant costs to both sides. The nature of that decision point reflects a broader pattern in how MBS conducts diplomacy, which is to say, with a directness and a timeline orientation that traditional diplomatic culture in the region finds startling, but that the Crown Prince has made his signature approach. MBS does not believe in the traditional Gulf diplomatic tradition of infinite patience and gradual consensus building. He believes in setting timelines, creating urgency, and forcing decisions that his interlocutors might prefer to indefinitely defer. That approach has generated both remarkable successes and notable failures in his diplomatic history, but it reflects a genuine strategic philosophy that the window for Saudi Arabia to make the moves it needs to make in the region and globally is not unlimited, and that deferred decisions have costs that accumulate. The 48-hour deadline attached to this call is classic MBS. It is a signal to the Pakistani Prime Minister, and through him to the Pakistani military establishment and intelligence apparatus that is the real power behind many of Pakistan's strategic decisions, that the time for deliberation has passed, a decision is required, and the consequences of delay or refusal are clearly understood on both sides. Now let's talk about what Pakistan brings to this moment, and why the Pakistani side of this conversation is more complicated than a simple calculation of what Saudi Arabia is offering or demanding. Pakistan right now is a country in the grip of multiple simultaneous crises, and the leadership navigating those crises is doing so under conditions of extraordinary pressure from multiple directions at once. The civilian government is managing an economy that has been repeatedly described by credible international financial institutions as operating at the edge of sustainability. Inflation has devastated the purchasing power of ordinary Pakistanis to a degree that has genuine social stability implications. Energy shortages have reduced industrial output and created conditions of daily hardship for millions of households. The debt service burden absorbs a percentage of government revenue that leaves almost nothing for the investments in education, health, and infrastructure that a country with Pakistan's demographics desperately needs. Against this backdrop, the relationship with Saudi Arabia is not simply strategically important. It is existentially important in the most literal financial sense. Saudi deposits in the Pakistani central bank, Saudi deferred oil payment arrangements, Saudi investment pledges, and the remittances of Pakistani workers in the kingdom are all elements of a financial relationship that Pakistan cannot afford to jeopardize. But Pakistan is also operating within a set of constraints that MBS understands and that make the Pakistani position genuinely complicated. Pakistan has its own relationships with China, which has become its primary strategic partner and the source of massive infrastructure investment through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, with the United States, which remains important despite the turbulence of recent years, with its immediate neighborhood, including Afghanistan on one side and India on the other, where the security dynamics create pressures and obligations that cannot simply be wished away for the sake of Gulf relationships. China's role in this situation deserves specific attention, because Beijing is not a passive observer of what is happening between Riyadh and Islamabad. China has invested heavily in Pakistan, not just economically, but strategically. The CPEC is not simply an infrastructure project. It is China's gateway to the Arabian Sea, its strategic insurance against the maritime vulnerabilities created by its dependence on shipping lanes through the Strait of Malacca, and a demonstration of its model of development partnership to the developing world. Beijing watches anything that might significantly alter Pakistan's strategic alignment with the same intensity that Washington watches developments in its own critical alliance relationships. The call between MBS and Pakistan's Prime Minister therefore lands in a regional environment where multiple great powers, Saudi Arabia, China, the United States, all have significant and in some ways competing interests in the outcome. And the Pakistani leadership has to navigate all of those interests simultaneously while managing its own internal political pressures, its military establishment's distinct institutional interests, and the public expectations of 240 million people who are living through genuine economic hardship. This is the full complexity of the conversation that happened on that secure line. This is what was in the room, metaphorically, when those two leaders spoke. Now, let's address the specific content of what is known or credibly assessed about what was discussed. And let's be scrupulous here about distinguishing between what is documented, what is reliably sourced, and what is analytical inference based on the available context. What is documented is that the call happened. What is documented is that it happened at an unusual time and through channels that bypassed normal diplomatic protocol, indicating an urgency that was not routine. What is documented is that the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is currently at a juncture that both sides recognize as requiring high-level attention. What is reliably sourced from regional diplomatic circles is that the call involved discussion of Pakistan's role in a specific regional security framework that Saudi Arabia is actively constructing. This framework relates to the management of threats and instabilities in the broader Gulf and South Asian space, threats that include but are not limited to Iranian influence operations, non-state actor activities, and the security vacuum that has existed in certain areas since the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. Pakistan has unique capabilities and unique access that Saudi Arabia cannot replicate through any other partnership. The Pakistani military's institutional knowledge, its intelligence networks, its relationships with actors across the Afghan-Pakistan border region, and its capacity to deploy trained military personnel in sensitive environments are assets that Saudi Arabia has drawn on before and is seeking to draw on again in a more formal, more structured, and more strategically significant way than previous arrangements. The 48-hour deadline relates to a specific decision point in this framework, a moment where Pakistan needs to formally commit to a level and type of engagement that goes beyond its previous arrangements with the kingdom. The deadline is real. The consequences of the decision Pakistan makes within that window are real, and the historical significance of the choice being made is something that both sides are fully aware of. What is analytical inference, clearly labeled as such, is the following. The decision Pakistan makes in this window is likely to have implications that extend beyond the bilateral Saudi-Pakistan relationship and into the broader question of how the Muslim world's two most militarily significant states align themselves in the emerging multipolar order. A Pakistan that deepens its strategic integration with Saudi Arabia on these terms is a Pakistan that is making a choice about which gravitational field it primarily orbits. The Gulf-centered order that MBS is constructing, or the China-centered order that Beijing has been building through its BRI partnerships. These are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Pakistan has historically tried to maintain multiple strategic partnerships simultaneously with considerable skill, but moments of genuine deadline pressure, moments like this one, have a way of forcing clarifications that the art of strategic ambiguity normally allows leaders to defer. Let's now look at what this means for the Gulf specifically, because the implications of this call and this deadline extend across the entire regional architecture in ways that every significant Gulf actor is currently calculating. The United Arab Emirates is watching this closely. Abu Dhabi and Riyadh have had a complex relationship throughout the MBS era, sharing broad strategic alignment on many questions, while also competing for regional influence, economic position, and diplomatic primacy in ways that are real, even if not always visible. How Pakistan aligns in the emerging Saudi-led security framework has direct implications for the UAE's own calculations about its relationship with Islamabad and about its role within the Gulf security architecture. Iran is watching this even more closely. From Tehran's perspective, any deepening of Saudi-Pakistan military and security cooperation is a direct threat to Iranian strategic interests. Pakistan and Iran share a border. Iran has worked carefully over many years to maintain a functional relationship with Islamabad, despite the profound ideological and strategic differences between the two states. A Pakistan that formally deepens its alignment with Saudi Arabia, Iran's primary regional rival, changes the security geometry of Iran's eastern flank in ways that Iranian military planners take extremely seriously. Turkey is watching, calculating its own position in a Muslim world where the question of which capital, Riyadh, Ankara, or Tehran, serves as the gravitational center of Islamic political identity and strategic organization, remains genuinely open and genuinely contested. This is the scale of the reverberations from a single phone call. This is why a 48-hour deadline between two leaders deserves the serious analytical attention that its apparent modesty, a phone call, a deadline, a bilateral negotiation, might seem to belie. Now let's go deeper into the historical dimension of this moment, because what is happening right now between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan does not emerge from a vacuum. It is the latest chapter in a relationship that has been shaping the politics of the Muslim world for decades, and understanding that history is essential to understanding the full significance of what is being decided in this 48-hour window. The Saudi-Pakistan relationship in its modern form traces back to the 1970s, to the specific convergences of interest that emerged from the oil boom, from the Pakistani diaspora's integration into Gulf economies, and from the shared ideological and geopolitical interests that bound Islamabad and Riyadh together during the Cold War period and through the Afghan jihad against Soviet occupation. And the institutional relationships established between Saudi and Pakistani security establishments during those years have echoed through subsequent decades in ways that are still shaping events today. The relationship has not been without its tensions. There have been moments of genuine friction over Pakistan's nuclear program, which Saudi Arabia has always had a complex and not entirely transparent relationship with, over Pakistan's domestic political instability, which has periodically made it a difficult partner to rely on, over the competing pressures from China and the United States on Pakistani strategic alignment, and over specific regional situations, where Saudi and Pakistani interests have not been perfectly aligned. But through all of those tensions, the fundamental strategic logic of the relationship has held. Saudi Arabia needs Pakistan for the military depth, the demographic weight, and the Islamic credibility that the kingdom cannot generate from its own resources alone. Pakistan needs Saudi Arabia for the financial lifelines, the labor market access, and the diplomatic support that have been essential to the Pakistani state's survival through multiple crises. That fundamental logic is what MBS was activating when he picked up that phone. He was calling in decades of relationship capital. He was also offering something in return. And the nature of what Saudi Arabia is offering Pakistan in exchange for the commitment it is seeking is another element of this story that the available evidence strongly suggests involves a package of financial, investment, and strategic guarantees that goes significantly beyond previous arrangements. The scale of what is reportedly on the table from the Saudi side, investment commitments, energy arrangements, financial support mechanisms, and strategic assurances, reflects MBS's understanding that demanding a significant strategic commitment from Pakistan requires a commensurate offer. The Crown Prince has learned from the successes and failures of his earlier diplomatic approaches that the most durable arrangements are those where both sides feel they have received something genuinely valuable. This is not charity. This is strategic investment. And the returns MBS is seeking are commensurate with the scale of what he is offering. What does this mean for the people of Pakistan, the 240 million human beings whose lives will be affected by whatever decision is made in this 48-hour window? This is a question that the geopolitical analysis frequently glosses over in favor of abstract strategic calculations. But it is the most important question of all, ultimately, because strategic decisions at this level have very concrete consequences for very real people. If the arrangement being discussed deepens Pakistan's integration into a Gulf-centered security and economic framework, the potential benefits include significant financial stabilization, increased employment opportunities for Pakistani workers in Saudi Arabia, investment flows into Pakistani infrastructure and industry, and the diplomatic backing of the region's wealthiest and most influential state. These are not trivial benefits for a population that has been living through severe economic hardship. The potential costs and complications are also real. Deeper strategic alignment with Saudi Arabia on the terms being discussed would require Pakistan to navigate its relationship with China with great care. And China does not respond well to what it perceives as its partners drifting toward competing alignments. It would require Pakistan to take positions on regional security matters that might generate tensions with Iran and complicate the management of Pakistan's already difficult western border. And it would require the Pakistani military establishment to commit resources and capabilities to arrangements that would limit its strategic flexibility at a moment when the regional security environment is about as unpredictable as it has ever been. The Pakistani people, through their elected representatives and their broader civil society, deserve to be part of the conversation about these choices. The history of Pakistan's strategic decisions being made in closed rooms by military establishments and intelligence services without meaningful public accountability is a history that has produced both strategic stability and democratic deficits, often simultaneously. Whatever is decided in this 48-hour window will be decided, as these things almost always are in Pakistan, by a small number of people in a small number of rooms. But the consequences will be distributed across 240 million lives. That asymmetry between decision-making and consequence-bearing is one of the fundamental dynamics of geopolitical power, and it deserves acknowledgement even when it cannot be immediately corrected. Let's now look at what the next 48 hours actually look like, what the process of this decision involves, who is in the room on both sides, and what the realistic range of outcomes looks like as this extraordinary deadline approaches. On the Saudi side, MBS will be receiving real-time intelligence assessments of Pakistan's internal deliberations, reading the signals from Islamabad's diplomatic communications, and calibrating his own follow-up pressure through the multiple channels, financial, diplomatic, personal, that the kingdom has available. The Saudi intelligence apparatus and the network of Saudi diplomatic relationships with Pakistani counterparts at multiple levels will be generating a constant stream of information about where the Pakistani decision is heading. On the Pakistani side, the decision is not the Prime Minister's alone to make, and everyone involved understands this. The Pakistani military establishment, and specifically the Army Chief and the Intelligence Directorate, are the institutional actors whose buy-in is essential for any strategic commitment of this nature to be credible and implementable. A civilian government promise that the military establishment does not endorse is not a promise that Saudi Arabia can bank on. MBS knows this, the Pakistani Prime Minister knows this, and the consultations happening right now in Islamabad are therefore happening at both the civilian and military levels simultaneously. The realistic range of outcomes includes a full commitment. Pakistan agrees to the framework being proposed, accepts the deadline, and delivers the strategic alignment MBS is seeking in exchange for the package of commitments Saudi Arabia is offering. This outcome would mark the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship, with significant implications across the regional architecture. It includes a partial commitment. Pakistan agrees to elements of what is being proposed, but carves out specific areas where it cannot or will not commit, offering instead a narrower version of alignment that it hopes will satisfy Saudi Arabia's most pressing needs without fully foreclosing its other strategic options. This is the outcome that would reflect Pakistan's traditional preference for strategic ambiguity, and it carries the risk that MBS, who has little patience for half measures, finds it insufficient. This outcome would carry significant costs for the bilateral relationship and would force both sides to recalibrate. Saudi Arabia to assess what pressure tools are available to bring Pakistan back to the table, and Pakistan to manage the diplomatic and financial consequences of having declined a Saudi request at this level. The history of this relationship suggests that complete breakdown is unlikely. The mutual dependencies are too deep, the costs of rupture too high on both sides, for that outcome to be the most probable. But the 48 hours are genuinely uncertain, and the outcome within them is genuinely consequential. Here is what the world needs to understand about this moment, the full weight of what is being decided, and why it matters beyond the bilateral relationship, beyond the Gulf, beyond South Asia. The world is in the middle of one of the most significant geopolitical realignments since the end of the Cold War. The unipolar moment, the period of unchallenged American dominance that followed the Soviet collapse, is over. Multiple centers of power are competing to shape the emerging order. And the critical variable in that competition is not military power alone or economic power alone. Saudi Arabia under MBS is attempting to position itself as an indispensable node in the emerging multipolar order, a kingdom that is neither a pure American client nor a Chinese or Russian instrument, but a genuine pole of power in its own right, with its own relationships, its own framework of regional organization, and its own model of governance and development that it offers as an alternative to both Western liberalism and Chinese authoritarianism. Pakistan, under its current pressures and with its unique strategic assets, is one of the key pieces in that positioning project. And the 48-hour deadline is the moment when MBS is testing whether that piece will move into the position he needs it to occupy. The result of that test will ripple outward. It will be read in Beijing as a signal about Pakistan's reliability as a BRI partner. It will be read in Washington as a signal about the degree to which Saudi Arabia is successfully building the independent regional architecture that American strategists have been watching with concern. It will be read in Tehran as a signal about the security environment on its eastern flank. And it will be read across the Muslim world as a signal about where the gravitational center of Islamic geopolitical organization is shifting. The call has been made. The clock is running. And when those 48 hours expire, the world that exists on the other side of that deadline will be different in ways large or small, in ways immediately visible or slowly emerging, from the world that existed before MBS picked up that phone. History is not made only in the grand declarations and the public ceremonies and the signed agreements that cameras record and archives preserve. History is also made in the private calls, the closed rooms, the urgent deadlines, the decisions taken under pressure by leaders whose names future generations will study precisely because of what they chose in moments like this one.